You ever get one of those ideas that you just don't let go? Some call it an idea. I suppose others might call it a dream. I got one 20 years ago. It was about a month after my dad died. See, he lived until the day before his 47th birthday. Now what you need to know is his dad died at 46, as did his dad too. We'd called it the Adair family curse. So back to that idea. I decided that if I made it to my 47th birthday, that I'd celebrate and get myself something I really wanted. Back in 1998, I didn't know it'd be a milling machine. In 1998, I didn't even know what one was. But all these years later, the hobbies changed, the interests changed, my 47th came and went, and I bought a milling machine. I live in Denver. We never had the manufacturing industry like they did out east. Mills here in my area are hard to come by, and when they do crop up, they command a high price. Despite knowing my 47th birthday was coming and remembering this idea, I didn't have any money saved up, but I did have a car and nowhere to go, and that's the next best thing. A Craigslist ad, a half a dozen tire kickers, and I had the means for a mill. $3,000 doesn't buy much anymore, so a new mill wasn't in the stars. I knew I'd have to go cheap and hope for the best. Finding someone who would put a 2,500 pound mill on a truck and send it out west was tough. Finding someone who would do it and send it to a residential address, well, that was even tougher. My options, to say the least, were limited. A few weeks later, I found this Millport on eBay. The seller said he could get it to me for a flat rate of $1,000. I offered him $2,000 for the machine and the deal was done. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing. I had no idea if it were shipped or when I'd get it. I didn't know where it was. No news. Then one Tuesday morning, just before 7 o'clock, a Russian guy knocked on the door and said he had a mill for me. I got my first look at my new mill in the back of a half-empty box truck. It was wrapped in plastic and strapped to a rickety pallet. Mr. Russian had a pallet jack. I had a gravel driveway. The two are about as incompatible as oil and water. There is a concrete pad in front of my garage, but the problem is 20 locust trees stand between it and that box truck. At first, Mr. Russian didn't want to chance it. I could see the thought of unloading it on the street was bouncing around behind his eyes. It took the promise of a $100 tip to get that box truck to that concrete pad. Now the problem is, there's another 300 yards of rock between that pad and the X I'd drawn on the shop floor. The reality of moving a mill piece by piece in the back of a 27-year-old pickup began to set in. I scrolled through the internet for hours looking for another option when a simple ad on Craigslist caught my eye. It was just a photo of a forklift, a trailer, and a Bridgeport, and the ad simply read, "I move machines, text me what you have." I don't know what experiences you've had in life, but for me, texting some guy on the internet has rarely gone well. But with rain in the forecast and the thought of a wet mill, I gave it a shot. I sent a photo of the mill and a text message. 5 minutes later, I had agreed to pay a guy $500 to move a mill 300 yards. The whole deed took about an hour, 100 beeps of a forklift, 2 trips on a trailer, and I was $500 poor, but I had a milling machine in my workshop. Standing in front of me on a masking tape X stood a behemoth of a machine. It was covered in cobwebs, covered in oil, covered in chips, and had 2 broken ball cranks. But it was mine, a 20-year-old dream finally realized. Initially, I had hoped that I could just clean this mill up, paint it, and put it to work. Of course it didn't go that way. The motor on this mill was seized up solid. Both bearings were impossible to turn. I reckon this is the reason it was covered in cobwebs. They probably pushed it in a corner and that was it. It sat there for years until it got liquidated and I bought it. So a cleanup and a repaint, that wasn't gonna cut it. I decided it had to come apart. I wanted to repaint it. I wanted to go through and check the bearings. I wanted to go through and just make sure everything on this mill is correct. So I tore it apart completely. I couldn't have done this without the shop crane. It was an essential tool for this job. Every part of this machine is incredibly heavy. The paint on this machine was just in horrible condition. When they made it, they covered it in filler to fill in any casting defects, and then they painted it. I think putting filler on the spots on this machine where it receives a lot of wear did not make sense. I used a needle scaler and I removed that filler. I did leave the filler in the column. I just repaired it with some body filler and sanded it smooth. I didn't want to just paint this machine gray like everybody does. I wanted it to be a little bit unique, so I mixed up my own color. When I was painting the turret, I noticed that the areas where the ram lock were had cracked. So I mounted it in my jet mill and I milled out as much of the damage as I could. When I took the mill apart, I was able to lift the base by just running a strap through the door, but that wasn't going to work now that it was cleaned up and painted, so I made a lifting bracket out of some 1/2-inch steel. I bolted that inside the turret mount and I was able to lift the base that way. My shop crane really isn't wide enough to accommodate the base, so I had to lift it with the boom all the way out. This made it really difficult to move, but I was able to get it in place. I think the reason the ram locks cracked is because when they were tightened down, they created an upward force. I made a set of bullet-shaped locks. Because of their shape, they can't provide an upward force. Hopefully this will prevent the ways from cracking in the future. The knee has to be perfectly aligned to fit onto its ways, so I used a load leveler to get it to the right angle. I installed the gib, and I was pleased to find that it had plenty of adjustment. Before I took it apart, the knee was incredibly stiff. You pretty much had to lean on the handle to raise it. When I took it apart, I found that the bearings were completely full of chips. They weren't even bearings anymore. So I replaced all the bearings for the knee, I replaced the lifting bearings, and I replaced the bearings for the screw. The ram had a 1-inch hole on the top for a lifting eye. I had made a lifting bracket for that and it worked perfectly for getting the ram in place. The gib strip fit in there perfectly and now the ram slides back and forth really nicely. The inside of the motor was absolutely filthy. It was full of a really thick, oily black dust. I think it's probably belt dust, but it could also be parts of that bearing. I wasn't sure this motor was going to work. I didn't know if it was damaged from the heat, but I cleaned it up, I replaced the bearings, and I gave it a shot anyway. Fortunately for me, it spun right up to 3400 RPM without issue. I celebrated the success by giving it a coat of paint to match the machine. The saddle on this machine has phenolic ways. I'm not entirely sure if this was done when it was brand new, at the factory, or if somebody did this later to try and repair wear. I cleaned up the saddle in the parts washer, and then I used some phosphoric acid to remove as much of the rust staining as I could. The gib strip for the saddle, it was fairly well worn. It went right up to the end of its adjustment. I did have enough adjustment to remove the play, but I don't have a lot of adjustment left. I'm going to either have to replace this gib in the future or look for another saddle. I was really fortunate on this machine. The screws and nuts for the table were in really good shape. They only had a minimal amount of wear. I had no trouble removing the backlash from these. The screws were both fairly well packed with debris. I didn't have any trouble removing that using a drill and a wire brush. It just took a long time. The table on this machine is in surprisingly good shape. It's really rusty and the paint is flaking off, but it doesn't have a lot of damage to the upper surface. I used the needle scaler to remove the old paint on the underside of the table, and then I gave it a fresh coat of paint. After I cleaned up the table, there was still a lot of rust staining that I couldn't get out. So just like with the saddle, I used phosphoric acid to remove those stains. I finished by polishing the table with a Scotch-Brite pad and some automatic transmission oil, and then I stoned it to remove any high spots. The gib strip for the table was considerably less worn than the one for the saddle. I had plenty of adjustment and had no trouble removing the play in the table. After all this work, the table moves so smoothly. It actually feels like a precision machine now. The original power feed was completely worn out. It was really tired, but it worked in one direction. It just did not work in the other. It was also missing the lower cover and the brass gear was damaged. I had a power feed on hand that I'd bought from my jet mill and couldn't make work. Just so happened it fit this machine. After all the work I put into it, the table turned out great. When I spun the spindle by hand, I could feel that the spindle bearings were dry, so I decided to completely disassemble the head. My plan is to replace the bearings and just lubricate everything up, make sure it works correctly. When I took it apart, I found that the power down feed was missing parts and that the plunger was seized up in its bore. There's no way the power down feed worked on this machine. I also discovered that the lever for the lower auto stop was bent and that the upper stop was just completely misassembled. There you go. I'm going to leave that together and just clean it up. I mentioned some parts were missing from this head. Finding replacement parts for an import clone of a Bridgeport is really difficult. I bought several Bridgeport specific parts and not a one of them fit without modification. Everything on the Bridgeport is imperial threaded, everything on this import is metric, so I did a lot of recutting of threads. So if you've got one of these imports and you're rebuilding it, keep in mind that even though the Bridgeport parts may look the same, they're likely completely different and you won't be able to use them. The hardest part of this entire project was removing the drive gear for the auto downfeed. You have to support the downfeed shaft and pry that gear upward. It requires so much more force than I was comfortable with. I had to stick with it and I did get it out in the end. I did replace the 3 spindle bearings. The 2 lower bearings are the ones that actually carry the load. Those are angular contact bearings and they were quite expensive, about $360 for the pair of those. When I put the head back together, I replaced all the bearings. I didn't have any trouble with assembly. It went together really easily. I am incredibly proud of the end result. This mill looks so nice compared to what it looked like when I got it. It took me 30 days of working on it several hours every day to get it to this state. I don't yet have any of the electronics installed. I really want to test it though, so temporarily I'm going to hook it up to the VFD that drives my drill press. So I've got it together and running, testing everything. Everything works. The motor is spinning perfectly. It's not making any weird noise. The VFD speeds it up and slows it down just like I would expect. The power down feed works, as does the auto stop. The power feed on the table moves back and forth. It makes a little bit of noise, but it works really well. And the back gears work great too. The back gears on this machine provide roughly an 8-to-1 reduction. That lets me get some really slow spindle speeds. This is what the spindle speed looks like at 3400 RPM on the motor. This is when it's in the slowest speed configuration in the pulleys. Here's a look at the final electronics. I've got a single phase 240 volt coming into a box. That feeds a VFD which converts my single phase into 3-phase to drive this motor. I installed a tachometer so I can see both the motor speed and the spindle speed, and I've fitted a 3-axis DRO. Some other things I did in addition to the electronics, I installed some rubber way covers to protect the ways. I also bought a 6-inch vise. I tore it apart, I had to regrind the jaws, I painted it to match the mill, and now it's a good usable vise. Now that you've seen the mill, let's make its first chips. I'm gonna go really slow here. I haven't yet run in the spindle bearings, and I really don't know how the machine is gonna perform. So I'm gonna be really cautious. I'm not gonna talk over this. I'm just gonna let you guys listen to the noise of the machine. I'm also not gonna speed up the footage. I'll let you watch it in real time. Otherwise, you can hit that fast forward button. I've got a fly cutter fitted. This is my favorite tool. I figure it'll work well for the initial test. That high-pitched whine you hear, that is the fan on the VFD, and it really is that loud in person. I do plan in the near future to replace the thing. It's almost surreal. I come out here sometimes and I admire the machine sitting here. It's just waiting for the next project. It's the realization of a dream that I have had for more than half my life. A celebration, I suppose, of my 47 years and a monument to my dad. All the things he taught me while he was here. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching today's video. I hope you got something out of it. Until next time, I'll see you later.